Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Bradshaw. I'm the associate producer at the Huntington Theatre Company. And on behalf of the Huntington and Harvard Arts Museum, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's discussion entitled Returning to Rothko, a conversation of theater and art. Dream Boston, which you just saw a slide of, is a series of short audio plays produced by the Huntington, and they're written by local playwrights. We asked them to imagine their favorite locations, landmarks, and friends, and a future where people can once again meet and thrive in the city that we've been missing. Right before we get started, I would love to introduce the play that tonight's play that we're going to discuss. It was entitled The Moment Before the Lights Went Out on the Rothkos by John Kuntz, which I was delighted to both produce and direct for. And we have John Kuntz, our playwright, with us today. It was inspired by the 2015 Mark Rothko exhibit at the Harvard Arts Museum. That exhibit was called Mark Rothko's Harvard Murals. And tonight we also have the curator of that special exhibit, Mary Schneider Enriquez, with us tonight. Before we begin, just a quick land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that our physical spaces stand on the occupied homeland of the Massachusetts people. We honor and respect the many Native peoples who are connected to this land, past, present, and future, including the Nipmuc and Wampanoag peoples. Our program this evening, a little bit housekeeping, our program this evening will be run as a webinar. So meaning that you in the audience, you can ask any questions that you'd like, but we won't necessarily see you. So just type into the Q&A if you'd like us to answer any questions after we have a introductory chat. So now it's my pleasure to welcome John Kuntz and Mary Schneider Enriquez. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Let's first talk about, right before everyone came on, we already started a quick chat between the three of us. And I just want to dive right back in. Mary, can you start and tell us a little bit about like the physical space that this exhibit was in and why, the initial reasoning why displaying the Rothkos in 2015 was so important to Harvard Arts Museum?
The Rothko murals were presented and exhibited in 2015 in the third floor of the Harvard Art Museums. We had just renovated our building. So we have our temporary exhibition space up there, and we basically tried to recreate or approximate the room in which the murals hung in what is now called the Smith Center, but used to be called Holyoke Center in the center of Harvard Square. The importance of doing this show at that moment was really one of my colleagues in conservation had been working for several years on an idea of how do you bring back the color of these extraordinary murals, which had faded with time, so that you can see the beauty and richness that the artist first created. How can you approximate that? And how can you do that without actually touching the canvas? Because the rule of thumb with conservation is everything has to be reversible. And the way Rothko painted, which was a very complex and extraordinary manner of using layers that were both matte and shiny, pigment powders and binder, but they would soak into the canvas in such a way that there is no way in which a conservator could touch up or bring back to life the canvases without actually literally changing and losing the artist's hand. So it was an impossibility that technique would be possible. They came up with this idea of creating, projecting light on the canvas in a pixel by pixel approximation of what the original pigment colors were. And we decided to make this our opening exhibition at the museum when we did the renovation because it was so exciting. And absolutely was a risk-taking move. I mean, it was a new idea relatively in conservation, and to take murals that are monumental in scale and fill an entire room and bring the color back in these abstract works was something that was a risky and interesting and exciting idea. And as a teaching museum, the idea of putting out this proposal for discussion, which is in a sense part of it, was a very important part of it, was one of the reasons we decided to make that exhibition at that time in our reopening to really focus on. I will add, and then I'll stop talking because I realize I'm saying a lot, and also really focusing on one of what I think personally, and I think a lot of people agree, is one of the great jewels of Harvard, which is this collection, this one work of art is, which is what Rothko called it, a work of art for a room, the Harvard Rothko murals. So showing them was just an incredibly important treat for me as well.
Yeah, I unfortunately didn't get to see this exhibit, but I've been in a room with a Rothko before, and I know that feeling of like not being fully around it like that room is, but kind of like you get lost in it. It's so deep and so layered, and it's very exciting to be in the room with it. And Johnny, this was kind of one of the impetuses to write this play. So, excuse me, I know you shared your kind of experience with us about seeing it. How did it become your play setting?
Well, when you first approached me to write the play, and one of the prerequisites for the Dream Boston series, it had to be set in the future when the pandemic was somehow over, and it had to be set in some sort of Boston or environs lands, landmark. And right when I was thinking about this, I had just got off the phone with Charles Hogland, and I was walking by the Harvard Art Museums. So it really was sort of by chance that I looked up and saw that beautiful building and realized that it was closed, for now anyway. And then I started to think of the last time I was there. And of course it was, back in 2014 when I saw the Rothko panels with my husband, Tommy. And Tommy was so excited to see them because he had just played Rothko in a play called Red with Speakeasy Stage Company in Boston. And, had such a kinship for Rothko. I mean, it was such a grueling play. It's only a 2-person play, and he was on stage the whole time. And, playing Rothko, playing a character like that, an artist like this, I know it took a lot out of Tommy, creatively and physically. And he was just so excited to see them. So we went together to see the panels, and it was, that's what I was thinking of when I walked by. I was like, oh, that was the last time I saw them. Then, of course, I thought, well, those panels were so sequestered there, so kind of, put away for a while because, I think for years, actually, and I'm not sure if that's right, Mary, but it was so meaningful when they came out again and people were able to see them again. And made me think, when we come out, it made me think about the meaning of, coming out of hiding, of, finally being able to be, to connect with other people, and to connect with artwork too, as well. And so that's when the idea started to strike me. And I took it from there. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it was so the play is called The Moment When the Lights Turn Off on the Rothkos. And I think Mary, can you talk a little bit more about that conservation technology? And I know there's some controversy around it, and I'm curious about, I'm sure you learned a lot from many different people's points of view about bringing Rothkos back with additional technology. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that.
Well, it was and I am not a conservation scientist, so I will say I will do my best to explain it in a manner that I think everyone will understand, but the real technicalities of it, you actually can learn more on our website, because I did some interviews with the conservation scientists. So if you have queries that are very specific about the science, I recommend you listen to those. But in any case, 2 of our conservation scientists, Jens Stenger, who's no longer at the museums, but was doing a special fellowship at that point, and Narayan Kandekar, who's the head of our Strauss Center for Conservation now, worked on, the issues of trying to bring the color back, as I said, without touching the canvas at all. And ultimately, there had been a system of an artist, well, I should say a conservator, had projected light on an older painting, and that had been, so people had been talking about this in the world of conservation. exact projection of light was not going to work with canvases like this. So they actually had to, what Jens had to do, and this was a series of Jens and Narayan, but also working directly with MIT and the Media Lab at MIT, basically had to write software that allowed a means by which you could project on a pixel by pixel basis what color would need to compensate for what is lost. In other words, what light projecting color would compensate. So if you were, the easiest way to actually kind of understand it visually was if you stood in the room with the murals hung, with the light projected, with, as Narayan would often do, with a cardboard, a white piece of cardboard that was between the projection of light on the canvas and the canvas behind you, you would see on the cardboard the light that was being projected on the canvas. So nothing touched the canvas in any physical form. It was simply the light, but it was so highly detailed. And one of the, and basically many people would ask, well, how did you possibly know exactly what color and how to approximate the pixel by pixel? What we did have is when Rothko created this mural series, he basically painted 6 canvases, all of which are enormous in scale. I mean, they fill, each one is more than 7 feet tall, so they fill a room clearly. He painted 6 canvases. He brought all 6 canvases from his studio in New York, drove them up to Cambridge, and then they were all brought up to the penthouse, the top floor of this building. And then he figured out which of the 6, which 5 he was going to use. So there was one canvas that wasn't used, and that canvas became the kind of model color-wise to help Jens figure out exactly what color. They also had an Ektachrome photograph of the original installation that a scientist in Switzerland had worked on. So this was a really incredibly exciting team of scientists all working at trying to bring these Rothkos back. So it's really inspiring, actually, on many levels. But that in a nutshell, in my way of describing, would be what was done or what was created. But I will add, as a curator, and part of the discussion about whether this was a good or bad thing is, it was an amazing thing, but I personally felt as a curator it's really important for people to understand the murals with and without the light. So we made a point every day, and you cleverly and in a great way included at the very beginning of your play, which I found very interesting, John. We turn off the projectors every day at 4 o'clock. So people would know when the show was up, and people would come in groups, and you also touched upon this in your play, to watch the lights go off. And the reason from a curatorial perspective that I felt this was really essential is I want people to see the canvases as they are and what the conservation tool allows us, but to know that difference. I personally think that the murals are every bit as powerful without the light as they are with, but they're different and amazing in different ways. So anyway.
Yeah, John, let's talk about a little bit about the play and that moment. Like, that moment is, we have these 2 kind of wacky-do characters together, right? One's a little bit of a nut, and the other one is a little bit more serious and strict. And I fell in love with them, working with them and working with our 2 actors, Mariana Basham and Diego Arcenegas. But I'm curious about, like, why these 2 people, and why did they come there on that day?
Yeah, well, the moment that the lights went out, that I really did get to see that was important for Tommy, that we be there and see that. And I have to agree, Mary, that they were, so different and yet so powerful in different ways, but also seeing the lights go out, you really get to see time, you get to see, like, what happens, a passage of time suddenly in a moment. It's kind of incredible what you did, what that team of people did, all of you did. When I started writing the play, I was thinking a lot about Rothko, and I'm by no means an expert on Rothko, but when I look at his paintings, when I looked at those, I always got this sense of there's something, just for me, so solid and almost religious and about a Rothko. you feel enveloped by them almost
Very much so.
when you look at them, and and they have this intensity that is that is also so still. There's almost a stillness, a vibrating
Mhm.
thing at the same time, which I know doesn't sound like that's possible, but it is.
Mhm.
Then I thought, well, what if a person was a Rothko? What if a Rothko was a person? So that's where I came up with the character of Scott, who has come to see the Rothkos and kind of is a Rothko. So I tried to make him as kind of religious and serious and serious-minded and
Mhm.
pure. And then I thought, well, what is the opposite of a Rothko? Because with drama, you always have to have conflict. So I was like, what if what the opposite of rock? And I guess there's a lot of answers to that question. But the first one that came to mind was a Jackson Pollock. For me, and I don't know if that's even right, but for me, a Pollock is just so different from a Rothko. It's so exuberant and almost chaotic and jazzy and full of energy, but in a different way than a Rothko. And then I thought, well, what if there is a person who's a Jackson Pollock and there's a person who's a Rothko, and they're standing in front of the Rothkos and they just start talking. What might this conversation be? So that's, once I had that idea, the play just sort of really wrote. And I only had 2 weeks to write it, so I had to work really fast. And sometimes that's a good thing because you don't second guess yourself. So my character Ernestine was a Pollock in my mind, and Scott was a Rothko, and and their conversation is yeah. It surprised me, some of the things that Ernestine would say, and that would need to deflect. But yeah, that's kind of how I got the idea, or like how it kind of all came about.
Yeah, I remember the conversation in the rehearsal in the recording room. We were just kind of talking through these like crazy scenarios that Ernestine just like thinks up out of the blue. They're just kind of in the back of her head. And it's like I know someone like this, but not all like this. It's so exciting to dive into such a kooky lady.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
John, you talked a little bit about like leaning into visual art as a way to kind of get ideas. And I'm curious, like before plays, I usually walk around a museum and see if there's a certain piece that I can bring to a scenic designer as a director, or like if something it connects to like the feeling of what I feel in a script. I'm curious for you as a writer, someone who really curates it from the beginning, the gestation period of an idea. Do you also look at visual art as a way of getting some ideas?
I really do. I love objects. I mean, that's kind of clear. I'm surrounded by them all the time, and uh, I like them better than television. I'll just sit and stare at my walls, and all sorts of stories will just start to develop, between my bric-a-brac. So I'm quite inspired, and I always tell my students too to just go out and it can't all just be one. Your focus can't be on one art form. We have to look at all art forms, because that's where you get your inspiration, is from things that aren't your focus. Because then you bring that into your art and you find a theatrical version, in my case, of what that might be. So yeah, I love thinking about that, thinking about the natural world too, animals and nature as well. Can be very inspiring too. So yeah, I'm always looking at different angles and trying to find out how I could make it theatrical.
Yeah, Mary, you also earlier talked a little bit about storytelling, and I'm really like curious
Mhm.
as a director and a producer. I use theater to story. I use that as my storytelling surface, and
Mhm.
I'm really curious about how you come at an exhibit from how do you tell that story and what story do you want to tell? I'm curious about you
Mhm.
talking a little bit about that.
Mhm. Well, if well, maybe just we'll go back to Rothko since we're
Yeah.
talking about that and this particular show. I mean, in addition to showing the murals and of course the importance of this conservation tool, we wanted to show the story of how he creates something, because people think of these large canvases and they assume, or one often thinks, oh, well, he just had this idea and he began exploring on, perhaps on the floor, when you talk about Pollock, painting on the floor and doing, you know, because physically, if it's that large, it's easier to do it that way. But what we did with this exhibition is we showed his working process. And in fact, we have in the collection at Harvard, and I was fortunate as a student many years ago to get to work on these way back. So I have a long history of loving these murals and working on them. But we have a whole series of his studies on paper, and they're on purple construction paper, and they are literally hand size. They're not even a foot long, many of them, and some are on different colored paper, but mostly they're on crimson colored paper, in which he would play out the motif that is the central motif in these abstract canvases, but also the brushstroke and the color. And so each is hand size, and he would, and we can tell by the grit and that which was pressed into them, that he actually, and we know because those who visited him in the studio at the time, he would actually cut them up and play around with them and position them and really use them as a means of thinking aloud visually with each of these works on paper. And you can see them when we open again. I mean, we use them in the exhibition, but one can visit the Harvard Art Museums and ask to see them. So I would encourage you to do that in our Art Study Center. But point of the story, back to the storytelling, is that when you came into the exhibition, we showed in cases all of these small studies to tell people how his process worked, how his thinking worked. Just as you walk around in a museum or outside and looking at objects or nature to come up with ways of thinking, he was doing this in his study, in his studio, with different widths of brush, amounts of pigment, pencil as well, and then doing them in a long way, then cutting them up into pieces and then playing and moving them around. So we showed all of those, and we flipped them over because they were double-sided. I'll also add that halfway through the show, so people could see that it wasn't a single sheet of paper, it was a double-sided image. We also included larger scale studies he did for the murals that relate to, like the National Gallery in Washington has a couple of canvases that are very related, although they weren't part of this exact series. So that what we were trying to do in showing this work was to show the viewer his working process, but also other works that hadn't faded. And so that you get the vibrancy of the vermilion red in particular is a color that he used that is just extraordinarily fiery and full of life. And another canvas from the National Gallery includes that. But so that you walk through space to space, and this to theater, I think of in the same way in many ways, is how do you set up space so that you draw people's eye, and in this case, body as well, but really eye along the path of looking and thinking and responding and wanting more and seeing more. So there were 3 galleries. So they each, the big gallery you came in at first showed the studies to start the process. The next gallery showed you further images that did or didn't relate in ink, but I mean, they related everything. And then the last gallery you walk into was
it's the climax.
Mural room, yeah.
Yeah.
We actually recreated, I will also, because I thought of what so much of the magic you guys create on stage. We wanted to approximate the mural room as close as possible. Rothko was very deliberate about the lighting of his paintings, how high you hung them, and what the wall color was. So he determined in the penthouse room where they were hung, what he wanted on the walls behind his paintings, which was a kind of wallpaper that was a rather chartreuse olive. I'm not actually, I mean, not bright chartreuse. It's better to say like French mustard olive, you know, a goldeny green. And we actually tracked down the exact wallpaper. It was exorbitantly expensive, not possible for us to do. So the particular color you see in the images from that was an approximation of the wallpaper color that he specifically wanted as the background on which his paintings would hang. He wanted the lighting to be low, and his paintings, and you'll see this if you go to the Phillips collection and see his work, or you go to the Tate today. His paintings are hung quite close to the ground. He wanted people to walk, to your point, John, you are to be surrounded by them. He wanted you to walk in and have them, in a sense, bring you into their space. And in that, so all of those steps as a curator and laying out the exhibition were key to telling the story.
I remember seeing, I was fortunate enough to see the one at the Tate, and
Yeah.
like kind of standing in front of it and focusing for a while on one spot, and then kind of realizing I've missed like all of these other spots as you kind of step back, even though it's
Right.
like it's just one
Right.
color or one rectangle or whatever. It just yeah, it was really moving.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious about, like, you talked a little bit about like kind of creating the space, and this is kind of for both of you, like something about theater is we're interpreting the world around us, and we're also, like, as a director, I'm interpreting a playwright's words for actors and an audience. I'm curious about, for both of you in your different fields, like, how much point of view do you want to put on the art or the words, or how much do you let an audience interpret it?
Who do you want to go first? You, John, you start talking.
Wait, ask that question again.
So like, as a playwright, John, you're writing these plays, and you want to you're interpreting the world around you, and you're creating this world. How much do you want to push a point of view to an audience, and how much do you rely on the audience to tell you what your play is?
Oh, interesting. I always think, well, I think my plays are smarter than me. It's strange, and sometimes it takes a director and actors to actually tell me sometimes what my play is about. I write a lot on instinct. I just and sometimes I can't explain what I actually mean. The end of the Rothko play. All I know is that that there is a lot of kind of insane things happen in this little play, but at the end there's a great sense of sadness. And then right before, it meant so much that Mary was like, I listened to your play and I loved it. And at the end, I just felt so sad. And it's kind of what I felt. It's tricky to put it into words, though. What is the how much I think I probably do give a lot. I love to have the audience come away with their own idea of what might be. I love ambivalence and ambiguity, and I try not to spoon feed my audience too much. I think when I was younger, I think younger playwrights tend to worry that the audience isn't going to get it,
Right.
And then at a certain point in your life, you sort of let that go, and you realize that there's a lot of ways to see something. There's a lot of ways to be right, and there's a lot of ways to feel about a work of art, and that there's not one singular way. And you can even look at a piece of art and feel completely different, a month or a year later, because you've changed. So I think that's something that's so wonderful about theater and about art.
I agree with that. So much of what you just said, I completely agree with. In terms of, there are a couple things. When you organize an exhibition, it is a many-year process, and I'm sure, like theater, it's not although I love hearing the flexibility and nimbleness of this. You wrote this in 2 weeks, and we've been seeing it and hearing it, and I see things as I hear them. So it's been really fantastic. But in any case, back to doing exhibitions typically is a bit of, especially in our museum, it's a couple of years usually. You're thinking about what you really want to put in a space for people to respond to. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, and for example, last year, my colleague Nikita Best, who's our photography curator, she and I co-curated an exhibition called Crossing Lines, Constructing Home. And it was contemporary art looking at issues of immigration and how people have adapted or responded to displacement. And many people thought, oh, that's going to be so political, and you're telling people what, and in fact, what I did in that show, what I did in the Rothko show was I want work, and I did a exhibition on Dora Salcedo's work, a Colombian artist, years ago. What I am passionate about is what I put into a gallery, and I create an exhibition about that work, about that artist, about those artists, so that people can come in and have whatever opinion or respond in whatever way, but they respond and they think. And above all, so it's not telling them what to think. I would never, in fact, that's something that would make me sad.
Right.
It's having you respond in a world today, which I feel so much is a quick fix on our phone or our computer or like a Twitter, this. I really want art above all that I've organized a show about, or I hang, or I install, to make you stop and think and hopefully feel, because for me, I'm pretty emotional about art. I think it's just to spark a response in you, even if you don't like it at all. It means you're alive. And I think art has a role now more than ever under this pandemic of reminding us that we are alive, and that's a good thing. And that we're still alive, even though we're contained within these spaces and we're speaking to each other inside these squares, right? It is the gift of art. Liking it or disliking it, it is what is so vital to who we are as humans. There.
That's I just want to hear, I hear everything you say, and I want every production of mine to be exactly like that. Like I just think about how I have such a hard time with, like, I want people to walk away from plays that I direct with, I love it or I hate it because of X, Y, and Z. Like I don't want the like, oh, it was good, or the I liked it, and I'm like, no, I want that feeling, that reaction. It makes so much sense, especially right now.
Yes.
Um, Mary, why do you keep coming back to these paintings? It sounds like you kind of explained your love for Rothko for so many years. I'm just so curious. What draws you back?
It's funny. I grew up in a tiny town in Michigan, 7,000 people, didn't have art museums near me, didn't have art. I mean, I liked art, but I didn't really know that much about it. And Rothko was one of the first artists this is a very personal story, but he was one of the first artists when I was in high school whose work I saw that was abstract. And this was in books. It wasn't in, actually being exposed to it, that I just went, wow. And a lot of it his work deeply touched me and moved me in a way that I couldn't figure out how to get my arms around it. And I was, 16. I didn't really know anything about art. And the only thing I would say that I would disagree with you, John, that you just said was, you said you can see something now and you may not like it at all later. And I would say, not that I disagree with you, but in the case of Rothko, there has not been a moment when I don't still deeply love and am moved by his work, regardless of all the publicity about, the prices for his works and all the issues that, sadly the family had to deal with people, selling things and whatever. There is never a moment when I'm not brought to silence when I see a Rothko. And in my field, I know that there are so many artists whose work move me deeply, but this was fundamental to why and who I am as a curator of modern contemporary art today and I'm happy to say that, and I feel that was a gift, actually. And I think and I'll tie it directly to something else you said, John, was that your play refers to it. He talks about it. Scott talks about the way it made him feel, that there was this sense of both something spiritual and this ephemerality to it. And there is, to me, just this sense in not every single one of his works, but many of them, it touches me in this way where I stop and think about who we are in this broader world and why we are, which sounds perhaps corny to some people, but to me, that's exactly what his work does. So that's why I keep coming back.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Just to remind people, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw it into the Q&A function, and I'll make sure we ask it. I have another question. Johnny, I'm curious about, I feel like a lot of your plays, especially this one too, kind of go on these wild tangents. Do you I feel knowing you a little bit now, I feel like you kind of just like open up the I'm thinking of like for some reason the image of like a shaken up soda bottle is in is in my mind, but you open up that soda bottle and it just kind of explodes with thoughts.
Huh.
I'm so curious, like, do you tend to write it all down and then like what's your editing process? Do you edit any of it?
Oh golly, yes. You know, I'll write first. I'll just write, and I won't think at all. I'll try to stop well, it's not that I'm not thinking, but I'm trying to stop that little voice in your head, you know, the one that says you can't write, or you're not an artist, or you can't do this, you can't do, you know. And I found that if I just keep writing and ignore that voice, because I think we all have it
Yeah.
in our heads, and we have to sort of quiet them and just allow ourselves to just write or create or paint, or I imagine, without any sort of judgment, you know, coming from us, you know. And then I go back and I sort of look at what I've made. And sometimes I'll find out, oh, well, this is here and this is here. And I sort of play with them like little marbles a bit, and I bat them around. And then sometimes the structure just sort of presents itself. Sometimes I keep playing with it until it turns into something else too. I think I wrote this. There was a scene like this that I wrote that wasn't about Rothkos at all, just two people that were strangers, you know, but a completely different conversation. So I think I had that in my head. I had the Rothkos in my head. I had, but yeah, once something starts, I just kind of follow it wherever it might take me, you know, if that makes any sense at all.
Totally. Yeah, it makes total sense. Did you find any challenges with working in just an audio world? Like did you think about that when you were writing it, or were you, since we're such visual people and our work is so visual, curious about that.
You know, I really didn't at all. It was so weird. It was just like writing a play. I didn't really give it a second thought that there wasn't going to be any, you know, any visual at all. And then, of course, again, I went back and I kind of looked at it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is an audio play. Is that possible? But then, happily, it seemed like it was. You know,
Yeah.
I had to make any tweaks really to make it, you know, to make people understand what might be visually missing. So yeah, I actually really loved it, and I loved the process of working on the audio. It was just so fun to hear what your sound designer came up with, and how we could, like the sort of footsteps, like, you know, vault doors shutting, you know, as
Yeah.
Christine approaches, you know.
Yeah, I remember talking with the actors about like private versus public. Like at times it's a very private conversation, but you're in a very public place. But also galleries, oddly to me,
Yeah.
feel very private.
Yeah.
Like when I'm in a gallery, or especially when I'm in a gallery when no one else is in the room with me. If I happen to get in there, like get into a certain room with no one else, I just feel very like it's only me and whatever works of art around me. So I remember talking a lot about that too. We have a question from Cynthia that says, Johnny, you use zodiac signs in your in your play, and this question is zodiac signs and Rothko. What's the connection? And then Cynthia is also curious about what is our signs. I am a Gemini.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. We talked about that.
We Gemini moon. Just so you know, yeah. I'm an Aries. Mary, what are you?
Libra.
Libra. Oh, I love Libras. We're exact opposites. So we get along.
Well, good. That's good. It's not Pollock and Rothko then. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure. Yeah, the Astro. Yeah, I that that kind of came up. I was like, what else? You know, I was trying to think of, like, you know, because Ernestine really is trying to pick Scott up at the Rothko Gallery, which is an unlikely place really to do such a thing. But she's really trying hard. And I was like, well, what are pickup lines? What's your sign? Is very, was, kind of classic. So, she
It
just,
goes on such a tangent.
and on and on. Like I started writing, I was like, wow, this is like 5 pages long, this little tangent about, just one line. But I was just so amused by it, I couldn't stop myself, as she just kept getting it wrong over and over and over again.
And there's something like really like, I don't know if ephemeral is the right word, but like something that you try to think about someone differently when you hear that, like, I don't know, that label on them.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's funny.
Another question, when you're all in the creative process, do you listen to music? Do you listen to any particular musicians when working on these particular projects?
Oh, interesting. Mary, do you ever listen to music while you're?
I listen to music a lot, but I would say that my most creative process is when I'm running, and then I'm listening to music, and that's when my head is like in a zone that is, and it isn't one kind of music, actually. It's upbeat. I don't know. It could be U2. It's all over the place. So,
Kind of peppy.
yeah. Not always, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah, kind of
Could
goes.
be Adele. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if I listen to music when I write at all. I certainly do love music, though. It's like another form that inspired. It's like, oh, music. And if Rothko was music, what would it be?
Wow.
Interesting to think about that.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
Really interesting thought, actually.
Yeah, I find it like I think of, if a play like has a lot of music behind it, I'll listen to those. I'll create like a soundtrack for myself when I'm working on a play. Like if the play is in a certain time period or genre, but I think when I'm reading plays, or when I'm reading plays, I like it silent, so I can really like engulf in it.
Yeah. But finding out what kind of sounds are in a world are so interesting. Once you've like actually directing or devising thing, like I devise a lot with my students, and it's always fun when we figure out, this music is part of the, this is all Donna Summer, or this is all Kate Bush, and this is all yodeling, and then punk, and it sets the tone so much for the world, because I feel like theater is all about worlds, and that worlds have rules, and that you have to create the rules for the world, for the audience, and sound is such a help when you get really specific about it.
Yeah, even down to like the year. I remember working on a project and all the transitions was like specifically 2011, like emo punk. And you just immediately went back to like that radio station that you listened to in 2011 or whatever. So it was a really, it can like create time in a really cool way.
Yeah.
We have another question here. The Harvard murals, like theater, seem to have something to do with returning. The past returns in the present, and it returns again and again. Is there another return for the Harvard murals in the work of conservation science? Could there also be another play that returns to this play about the murals?
Oh.
How is it that we keep returning to Rothko?
Oh.
Many questions.
That's interesting.
Well, I'm going to jump in just with a question that relates to this and answers it, that Rebecca, you asked me from the beginning, which was whether, or actually John, both of you did, whether we would be hanging the murals again soon.
Yeah.
So coming back to returning to the Rothko murals again. They are very large, as we already talked about, and their condition is so fragile that they would have to be hung in a space in which they get the kind of attention that we were able to give them in the museum. I personally would love one day, I'm going to stick my neck out on the limb here, which is I would love Harvard to have, have a space in which they are permanently hung, and we take care of them and only show them a certain amount of time, you know, in the right conditions, because that's how we need to take care of them. But they're so important, and I think they're a real jewel of the university. So I would love there to be a day in which we can really show them and keep them there as and cared for in the way they need to be cared for. I think that's going to be very complicated. I know it's something we've had conversations about in the past, but they deserve to be appreciated in the way that so many people want to. I mean, I think the question about when they'll come back is a question constantly we receive at the museums. Oh, aren't you going to hang them again soon? Unfortunately, we don't have enough space, but they will come back. I have to believe, just as the pandemic will end one day, we will. Anyway, I hope there'll be another play about, so sorry.
Yeah, John, would you write a new play about it?
More than
characters?
Yeah, that the Rothkos come back and Ernestine and Scott keep coming back somehow later. You kind of follow their escapades. I love that idea. I love the idea. In my mind, someone builds a building for those Rothkos somewhere beautiful. And there they are, that would be lovely.
Great. That'd be great.
I know that's kind of, but wouldn't that be amazing? Wow.
It would be. Well, there's a Rothko chapel in Houston. We should have not a chapel, but a Rothko something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would be such a place to, like just like, this place you can actually go and see the Rothkos, and
yeah,
it'd be amazing.
It would be
that.
We have a question from George Carey. He asks, "Hey John, my question is for you to find. Does it get a little easier each time you pen a play, or is it always the same level of difficulty?" He says he struggles with writer's block and he has never written a play, so he's curious about how the process works for you.
Inspire.
I think it's definitely easier than it was when I didn't quite you kind of have to figure out your own way into plays. I think you have to find your voice. People always talk about that, and I think artists do too. Finding what they want to say, either on canvas or in a play. And when I was first starting out, I think one mistake that young playwrights make, again, I keep thinking about it, but is to have everything make sense, to have everything kind of tie up at the end, that everything, kind of the idea of a well-made play, which, I was taught about the well-made play, but
right.
But you can also write the opposite of a well-made play. That's still a play. And the more I started playing with structure and character and the idea that, a typical play, that we all learned in 8th grade English class, Hamlet, there's a status quo, something starts, there's some sort of inciting incident, then all this stuff happens to get to the end. And that's, it's linear. And one day I remember I discovered, like, oh, plays don't really have to be linear. They can jump around in time. They can connect in other ways besides through plot. They can connect through theme or through character or through repetition of things, once I discovered that, it became much easier, I think, for me to write. It was like a letting go, in a way, of being like, oh, this is how I write plays, and that's how I write, and someone else would write them completely differently. But once I kind of learned that about myself, I felt a lot, I felt free, just sort of create as I think I should create,
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you always know when to end? I mean, I know with visual artists, this is a key thing I often talk with them about.
That's a good question. Sometimes I have the end first. I know how it wants to end, but I don't know how to, I don't know what the middle is. I'm really good at beginning plays. Maybe it's that Aries in me. And usually I can see, usually when you begin something, I like to think that you have some sort of a goal. I'm an actor too, so I think the acting kind of helps me with the writing. And because everything about acting you can apply to writing plays, you know. And actors just always need some sort of a goal. They need something, you know, actors act, there's some sort of action, there's some sort of goal, something that they need to achieve. There's consequences if they don't achieve it. And there's ways they can go about getting it. And it's the same thing with when you're writing a play. You know, if you think about those things and just kind of put them together, you know, magical things happen, and that there's a million ways to do that.
Right.
And yeah, that's why I love the idea of Jackson Pollock and Rothko. You know, like the paintings,
Having a conversation. Yeah.
Yes.
their artwork talking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much.
Mary, we have a question for you. Do you think about the process of experiencing a Rothko painting as having an arc, or is it a kind of subliminal narrative to looking at them, or is it flashes of an experience?
I think of it as a process of the longer I look, the farther in and deeper I am inside of what I'm viewing. So I don't know if that means that's an arc, or it's definitely not flashes. It's a process. It really is a process, and I see it. And I don't think it's, to John's point about linearity or not, it is because it can depend on the state I'm in when I start looking at it a little bit, how I'm going to respond, but it's always something that I just keep looking and in a sense feeling and thinking at the same time. And it's not a flash and I don't walk away. It's always a considerable amount of concentrated attention without it being forced. It's just a natural response I have to it. I don't know if that answers the question, but that is.
Yeah, it sounds like a meditation almost.
Almost, yes, actually.
Meditation with them.
Yes.
Which is a different type of processing in a way.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Any other things that you two feel like you want to share? Any other, I don't know, fun facts about Mark Rothko or fun things you're working on, John, that you're excited about?
Oh my goodness. Actually I was so excited, first of all, that you asked me to do this play. I had such fun writing this. Yes, everything that I was supposed to work on in theater, of course, was postponed, and in terms of acting, I was supposed to do a play. We're supposed to start rehearsing next month, actually, but that was postponed. I was supposed to. Oh, sorry, that's my three-legged Chihuahua. I was supposed to do the Shakespeare on the Common. Of course, that was postponed as well. So I'm teaching a lot right now. Sorry.
Mary, what about you? Anything exciting on the horizon for you?
Well, actually, it's funny in some way, because so much is virtual, so much more is about expression visually, me to others, as opposed to having you walk around the object. And I find that's been a challenge, because I really love objects and having you see them, as you can tell when I talk about the Rothkos, but see them in person as opposed to on a screen. So lots of different projects related to teaching right now, because we're closed, and for the foreseeable future. I mean, I don't think it's been officially announced what will happen this winter, but I would guess that we won't be open, since Harvard's going to be virtual anyway.
Right.
But in any case, so I'm working on a big project with Krzysztof Wojcicko, who's a professor at the design school at Harvard, who just had a couple of outdoor installations in New York, pre-pandemic and during pandemic, in Madison Square Park, which is he's doing a particular work for the museum when we reopen that has to do with the origins of democracy, that has to do with filming and interviewing students and others about what they think democracy is about. We started this 2 years ago, and you can imagine, given all that's happened in our world in the last 8 months, how this has changed and
larger
evolved.
Bigger
So,
project than you thought.
it is, yes, it's been extremely interesting and exciting. So I look forward to showing that when we open to all of you and your thoughts. So among other things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, thank you both. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous come through the chat, so I just want to also say thank you so much to both you, John and Mary, for this wonderful discussion tonight. Some people were wondering how we hear the play if they haven't heard it already. If you go to huntingtontheatre.org, you'll see all of the Dream Boston plays. John's is just one of 11 of our plays. They're all about 7 to 8 minutes long, and you can listen to them on Apple Podcasts and everything, but make sure you check out his if you haven't listened to it yet. And then also make sure to visit harvardartsmuseum.org to engage with the museum from home, since there's plenty of things.
Yeah, we have a lot of things going on. So
exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you for tonight, and thank you, and stay well. And we hope to see you at our next panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.